Every story has a timeline. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. Remember when we created our story, I'm going to click on this little pencil to remind us of what we put in. I actually was able to create my entire dramatic arch. I had my setup scene, and my setup scene is where Mom was asking player about the steak. My activity or action scene where we got to see what was really happening. My boss moment when something really important happened and my player has to decide whether to tell the truth or lie. And then there's the outcome, what happens at the end based on the decision that my student or player makes. So I'm going to close this. So I know I have a lot of different scenes. I have a setup scene, I have an activity scene, and an outcome scene. And I need to plug those into my timeline. So here's the name of my story. And if I come to the right, I see that there's a little clock. It's set to 5 o'clock, it looks like, doesn't it? And when I mouse over it, it tells me that this is my timeline tracker. You'll be able to read what you need what a timeline tracker is. But I'm going to click on timeline tracker. And I am going to assign my scenes to this timeline. Here's what I mean. So you'll notice it automatically puts in the name of my timeline. That's very nice. And it puts in some more information, a description that this is a timeline object for my story. And I typed in that this will help my story unfold. You can put anything in here as the designer, anything that makes you remember what this is all about. I could even change this image. Maybe I want to have a picture of my dog here. I might do that next time. I can now click on Timeline. And when I click on Timeline, it's going to allow me to rename the scenes so that it makes more sense to me. Okay, this is what's going to tell my project how to let my story unfold. What happens first? What happens second? So here are my scenes, and my story just has one act right now. Maybe later on I'll create a new act, but right now I just have one act to my story. And in the first scene of my story, it is my setup scene. Remember, that was the scene where we meet Mom for the first time and she asks the player about the missing steak. I'm going to call my second scene the activity scene. That will remind me that this is the time when the dog is munching on the steak and the player is saying, better get you some water. And I'm going to call my third scene the boss scene. And that was the scene where Mom says, "What are you doing with that glass of water?" And the player needs to decide to lie or tell the truth. So now that I've created my scenes, I'm going to come to the bottom of the page and click Update Timeline Tracker. Now all of my scenes are set. And I can go back to my stories. And now I am going to connect my timeline to my story. I'm going to tell my story what happens first and what happens second. So here I am in my story and I'm looking at my actors. And let's edit Mom. I see Mom has 2 story points, 2 responses, and I want to make sure that my project knows that the setup story point should be first. So I'm going to click on the pencil. And here is all the information about my Mom and all of her responses or story points. So let's edit the Mom setup page because I want to tell the project what should happen after this setup page. We already know this is first. And so here's my page. And remember, this is the page where Mom says, "I could have sworn we left some leftover steak in the fridge." Well, I want to tell my project what happens when my player clicks this response. Yes, they're going to close and go home to the QPod, but I want something else to happen. I want the project or the computer to know that after they see this page, they should move on to the next scene in my story. So I'm going to add something called a conditional effect. This tells the computer what will happen when a player clicks on this link. Actually, what happens when they see this entire page. So let's click Add Conditional Effect. Now you're going to get this box that looks like this. The first thing to do is, we don't really need to give anything, right? We just need to set the timeline. So let's use this arrow and let's select Set. You'll notice when I choose that, it already knows that I'm looking at a timeline tracker, doesn't it? So let's come here and figure out which timeline tracker. So I'm going to click on this arrow, and I'm going to select my Finding Old Man Smith's Dog timeline tracker. I click that. Well, now I need to select the trait, or I need to select which scene. Now this part's a little tricky, so listen carefully. I'm going to select my scenes, and then I need to come here to select the trait value. This was the trait. It was either an act or a scene, and I'm saying it's a scene, and now I need to select which scene. Which scene do I want to move my player into once they have seen this page? So I click on this arrow. Now, if I choose Setup, then what's going to happen is that every time they see this page, they will only see the setup page. Well, that's not what I want. I want them to move on to the activity section after they see this page. So I'm going to select Activity. Now I'm going to save. And this will tell the computer, it will tell my project, that once my player has seen this setup page from Mom, they get to move on to the activity page. You'll want to do this for each of your pages. Make sure that each story point has a place in your timeline. In our next video, we'll then see why that's really important as we build our mission page.